Beneath the old Commonwealth, light arrives without a sun. It filters through white panels and careful lenses, diffused until it feels like clouded daylight poured along a corridor that has learned how to hold its breath. The walls exhale a measured warmth, the kind that takes the chill out of air without letting anyone grow drowsy at their post. This illumination has been refined over years of patient observation, adjusted degree by degree, until it achieved something approaching the gentle light of an overcast autumn morning. The kind of light that encourages contemplation rather than urgency. An observation camera completes its slow arc near the ceiling, its lens adjusting with the soft mechanical whisper of precision engineering. There is no urgency in its movement, no sharp pivots or aggressive scanning, only the measured attention of a caretaker checking on seedlings, ensuring that all remains as it should be. The camera's path has worn smooth grooves in its mounting, testament to countless rotations, each one a small ritual in the larger ceremony of institutional care. The air itself moves with intention, carrying the faint scent of recycled atmosphere, mixed with something that might be ozone from electrical systems, or perhaps the subtle fragrance of hydroponic gardens somewhere in the complex's depths. Each breath tastes clean, filtered through systems that scrub away not just impurities, but also the staleness that might accumulate in any enclosed space. The ventilation whispers through hidden ducts, a sound so constant it becomes silence, so essential it disappears into the background of consciousness. Before voices, there is hum, a layered, even sound made of systems that have agreed for years about what they should do and in what order. Coolant circulates and returns. Filters draw through and release. The floor picks up a vibration like the beat under a quiet song. In the stillness of that baseline, routines present themselves. Overnight logs closing with tidy annotations. Night shift compressing hours into lines of neat script and timestamps. Day shift spreading those lines back into actions that will carry forward. Against one wall, a workstation sits with the patient stillness of equipment waiting to be useful. On its surface, a worn keycard rests atop a leather-bound ledger, both items positioned with the unconscious precision that comes from routine. The keycard's corner shows the telltale smoothing of countless passages through fingers and pockets, its surface worn to a gentle curve that speaks of years of faithful service. The ledger beneath bears the Commonwealth Institute of Technology's original insignia, its academic dignity somehow enhanced rather than diminished by the passage of time. The leather binding has darkened with handling, developing the rich patina that only comes from decades of careful use. Neither the keycard's significance nor the ledger's contents reveal themselves in this moment of mourning, stillness. They exist as seeds of understanding, planted in the fertile ground of patient observation, waiting for the proper season of comprehension to arrive. The Institute has learned the value of such patience, the wisdom of allowing mysteries to unfold at their own pace, rather than forcing revelation through aggressive investigation. 50 feet down the corridor, a technician in a clean white coat pauses at a maintenance monitor, her head tilted in an attitude of listening that suggests something more than routine system checks. The monitor displays the usual cascade of green indicators, but beneath the visual confirmation of systemic health, something else demands attention. Through the speakers comes a sound that exists at the very edge of perception, not quite static, not quite signal, but something that occupies the space between the two. The pattern repeats with gentle insistence, neither urgent nor intrusive, but present in the way that distant thunder is present, felt as much as heard, noticed more in its absence than its occurrence. The technician makes a note in her handheld device, not with alarm, but with the careful attention of someone who has learned to listen to what systems say when they think no one is paying attention. The notation joins thousands of others in the Institute's vast database of small observations, each one a thread in the larger tapestry of institutional awareness. As the corridor settles into its daily rhythm, the facilities division begins the careful choreography that keeps this underground city breathing. In control rooms scattered throughout the complex, technicians review overnight logs with the methodical attention of physicians checking vital signs. Each system reports its status in the language of numbers and graphs, but behind the data lies something more profound. The quiet miracle of maintaining life in a place where life was never meant to exist. A pair of workers lift a floor grating and set it down with the heel of a palm so it sits without rattle. Another traces a pipe run with a gloved fingertip, not to test for leaks. Sensors would call those loudly enough, but to feel for the faint warmth that says the coolant is not just moving, but moving as it should. Valves are turned by degrees, never by grabs. The atmosphere processors accept their checks like old machines who have been consulted rather than commanded. This is the mechanical garden that sustains the Institute, not the hydroponic bays where food grows under artificial suns, but the vast network of systems that creates and maintains the conditions in which human life can flourish beneath the earth. It requires tending as surely as any garden, with the same attention to detail, the same understanding of interconnection, the same patience with natural cycles that cannot be rushed. From speakers mounted discreetly along the corridor comes a sound that has played at this hour for longer than most current residents can remember. A recording made in the early days when the Institute's purpose was still being defined. The voice belongs to someone long gone, but the words carry the weight of institutional memory. We build to understand. The phrase settles into the morning air like a benediction, neither command nor promise, but simple statement of purpose. It speaks to the fundamental drive that brought these people underground, that sustained them through the difficult years of establishment, and that continues to guide their work in ways both obvious and subtle. Understanding, not conquest. Building, not destroying. The gentle philosophy of those who choose to create rather than merely survive. The corridor completes its transition from night to day, its rhythms aligning with the larger patterns of institutional life. The observation camera begins another sweep, its lens passing over the seam in the wall, the desk with its patient artifacts, the space where morning's first mysteries have been noted and filed away. It pauses for its habitual extra second and continues, maintaining its careful watch over a place that reveals itself not through dramatic gesture, but through the simple act of continuing to exist, to function, to serve the patient work of understanding. The hum is steady. The day has begun. Somewhere above facilities, in quiet rooms with softer chairs, someone will soon be aware of a pattern in a signal that sits inside a band very few people notice on purpose. The melody in the static follows, pliant as thread, ready to be woven by those whose work is listening, drawing us gently toward the morning's careful work. The melody threading through the maintenance frequencies finds its way into the careful choreography of the facilities division, where morning unfolds with the measured precision of ritual refined through years of practice. Here, conversation flows in the specialized dialect of those who have learned to interpret the subtle inflections of machinery, the difference between a pump that hums with contentment and one that whispers the first notes of future maintenance needs. Their morning rounds proceed with liturgical patience, each action following the last in sequences that honor both efficiency and care. Reclaimers received their daily attention first, filters lifted with gloved hands and examined under gentle inspection lights, before being rinsed with distilled water that carries no mineral burden to accumulate over time. The water runs clear, as it should, but experienced eyes watch its flow for the subtle changes in clarity or viscosity that might herald shifts in the system's deeper health. Coolant loops demand their own form of measured attention, a call and response between human observation and mechanical honesty. Dr. Elena Vasquez moves through this symphony of maintenance with the practiced grace of someone who has learned that her role is not to command these systems, but to listen to them, to maintain the ongoing conversation between human intention and mechanical capability that keeps the Institute functioning as both shelter and sanctuary. She turns the pages of her logbook with a ring finger rather than a thumb, a small habit born of years spent keeping oil and graphite away from paper's edge. Her readings are called in practiced rhythm, each number given its proper space to settle. Temperatures, flow rates, pressures, spoken not to enforce compliance, but to confirm harmony. The Institute's geography reveals itself through these careful observations, not through architectural drawings, but through the subtle textures that speak to those who know how to listen. Condensate threads its delicate patterns down observation windows, each droplet's path telling small stories about humidity levels and temperature gradients within different sections of the complex. The sweet dampness of hydroponic runoff carries hints of nutrient solutions and growing cycles, that faint organic richness speaking of life sustained through careful chemistry. Beneath it all pulses the steady heartbeat of the main reactor, its rhythms slightly different from the previous evening's cadence as it settles back into full operational parameters after its nightly drift toward lower output levels. Floor gratings lift with the soft scrape of metal on metal, revealing the hidden arteries through which the Institute's life flows. Each grating settles back into place with quiet precision, positioned so that expansion joints align properly and no vibration will develop over the hours of continuous operation ahead. The workers move with unhurried competence, understanding that the few extra seconds spent ensuring proper alignment will save hours of troubleshooting later. It is during this careful routine that the anomaly presents itself with gentle insistence. The same interference pattern noted earlier by the corridor technician, now weaving itself between the normal chatter of status reports and system confirmations. Dr. Vasquez pauses in her rounds, tilting her head to listen to something that exists at the very edge of audibility. The pattern carries an almost musical quality, intervals that repeat with soft persistence, but without the harsh urgency that would indicate system malfunction or external threat. In her personal logbook, a small leather-bound volume that has learned to hold important information without judgment, she makes careful notation. The interference rates classification as pattern unknown but non-threatening, a designation that acknowledges mystery without assuming danger. Her handwriting is neat, economical, the script of someone who understands that clarity in record-keeping serves not bureaucracy, but understanding. In the margin beside her current entry, previous notations catch the morning light. Someone has written Surface Liaison, archived in faded ink, the letters slightly blurred with age, but still legible to those who know to look for such annotations. The notation speaks to institutional memory, to projects and protocols that once occupied official attention, but have since been filed away pending future consideration. The ink's fade suggests years, rather than months, since the notation was made, yet its placement beside current observations implies ongoing relevance to those who understand the Institute's longer rhythms. The interference continues its gentle broadcast, maintaining its presence with patient persistence. No one rushes to investigate its source or demands immediate explanations for its appearance. Urgency has never been the Institute's preferred approach to mystery, particularly mysteries that present themselves without accompanying threats to personnel or equipment. The pattern will be documented, analysed, and understood in due course, following protocols that honour the proper scale of small mysteries, rather than inflating them into crises demanding immediate resolution. Dr. Vasquez completes her morning notations and prepares a brief packet for transmission through the Institute's pneumatic tube network. The interference pattern deserves the attention of specialists, those in the Synth Retention Bureau, whose work involves listening to what systems say when they think no one is paying attention. She includes a short recording clipped from the maintenance band, a spectral analysis mapping the intervals as if they were musical notes, and a photograph of the margin notation that connects this new mystery to older institutional memory. The pneumatic tube system accepts her capsule with a soft hiss, the indicator light flickering once before returning to its quiet white. Somewhere in the network's concealed pathways, the packet travels without hurry toward a desk, where listening is the primary craft, where patient minds catalogue and consider phenomena that exist at the intersection of technology and possibility. As morning systems stabilize into their daily operational rhythms, the soft signal draws attention not through volume or urgency, but through its gentle persistence, its refusal to be categorized among the familiar voices of institutional communication. It calls to those whose work involves patient observation, to the quiet chambers where sensitive equipment and thoughtful analysis transform mystery into understanding through the careful application of attention to subtle patterns that connect all things. The melody continues, patient as water, carrying with it the accumulated observations of another day's beginning. We follow it in thought rather than step, down corridors that narrow and widen again, past rooms where silence serves as tool, toward the domain of those who have made their profession the gentle art of listening to what the world whispers when it believes no one is paying attention. The pneumatic capsule arrives with the soft whisper that announces completion of another small journey through the Institute's hidden circulatory system. Within the Synth Retention Bureau, time moves at the pace of careful thought, measured not in the urgent rhythms of crisis response, but in the deeper cadence of sustained contemplation. Here, the very atmosphere encourages patience, air that circulates with deliberate calm, lighting calibrated for the long work of understanding, rather than the quick assessment of mechanical function. Dr. Justin Ao receives the capsule at a workstation that speaks to the SRB's particular approach to investigation. Multiple screens rest at the edge of attention rather than demanding it, their displays scrolling data in gentle cascades that can be absorbed peripherally while the mind focuses on deeper patterns. The lighting here differs subtly from facilities, softer, warmer, designed not for the close inspection of mechanical components, but for the sustained observation that transforms raw information into meaningful insight. He opens Dr. Vasquez's packet with methodical care, spreading its contents across his desk in a pattern that allows each element to inform the others. The handwriting is familiar, carrying the careful precision he has learned to trust, a reluctance to exaggerate, a preference for clean observation over preloaded conclusions. He reads the note first, not because words matter more than data, but because context helps signals speak clearly. Pattern unknown, non-threatening. The assessment carries weight precisely because it avoids drama. The recording device connects to his analysis station with barely audible confirmation, its stored signal flowing into processors designed to reveal structure within apparent randomness. Dr. Ao works with the patient precision of a watchmaker, filtering not to strip away complexity, but to separate constituent threads, to hear individual instruments within a quiet ensemble. The spectral analysis unfolds like sheet music, intervals and harmonics mapping themselves across frequency ranges with mathematical precision that somehow enhances rather than diminishes their melodic quality. As the analysis deepens, the signal resolves itself from mystery into recognition. What appeared as interference reveals its true nature. Not chaos, but careful composition. Each interval precisely placed, each harmonic deliberately chosen. The pattern carries the unmistakable signature of intentional design, of communication disguised as something else entirely. The frequency modulation follows rules that speak to those who know how to listen, while remaining invisible to casual observation. His fingers move across the workstation with practiced efficiency, calling up archived files that span decades of patient observation. The Institute's memory is comprehensive, its databases holding not just current operational data, but the accumulated wisdom of years spent listening to the Commonwealth's electronic conversations. Cross-referencing algorithms work with quiet thoroughness, comparing the new signal against thousands of previously catalogued transmissions, seeking matches that might illuminate origin and purpose. The correlation emerges with gentle inevitability. The pattern matches archived transmissions from a network the surface dwellers call the Railroad, a name that carries historical resonance, evoking older networks that once helped people find freedom through careful organization and mutual aid. Their communications system reveals elegant simplicity, messages disguised as lullabies, broadcast on frequencies that most listeners would dismiss as atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction. The lullabies themselves speak to synthetic persons seeking autonomy, offering guidance and reassurance in coded phrases that sound like gentle nonsense to unintended recipients. The moon shines bright on sleeping flowers, might indicate safe houses. Stars count themselves to morning, could specify meeting times. Wind carries seeds to distant gardens, perhaps suggests routes through the Commonwealth that avoid both Institute patrols and Brotherhood checkpoints. Here, in the quiet analysis of these intercepted communications, the Institute's true ethical framework emerges with crystalline clarity. Dr. Ao's files reveal a philosophy that has evolved far beyond simple binaries of possession and loss, developing instead into something more nuanced, more respectful of the complex realities that govern relationships between creators and created. The language in these documents speaks of persons rather than property, of situations rather than problems, of understanding rather than control. Across the room, archived binders line shelves with titles that tell their own story of institutional evolution. Where older documents say asset, later revisions read individual. Where earlier directives specify neutralize threat, addenda suggest de-escalate, contact, provide options. Pages are dated, footnoted, signed with the quiet pride of those who understand that governance is also a craft requiring constant refinement. A particular notation catches Dr. Io's attention, appearing with increasing frequency in recent files. Surface liaison protocols under review. The phrase suggests institutional memory of past attempts at communication, of bridges built and perhaps suspended, of lessons learned about the delicate work of establishing trust between communities that have reason to regard each other with suspicion. The notation appears beside cases where direct communication might have resolved situations that instead required more complex interventions. The lullaby signal represents something the Institute has quietly monitored for years. Its transmissions logged and analyzed but never disrupted. This choice speaks to values that run deeper than operational efficiency, reflecting an institutional commitment to minimal interference with surface communications that pose no direct threat to personnel or operations. The railroad's network continues its work, unimpeded, its messages of hope and guidance flowing through the Commonwealth's electronic landscape like water finding its natural course. Dr. Ao prepares his assessment with the same measured care that characterizes all SRB operations. The interference pattern will be reclassified from unknown to identified but non-threatening, with cross-references to historical context and operational guidelines that honor the Institute's evolving understanding of its proper relationship with surface communities. He writes in careful, ordinary prose. Source identified as North End Cluster, consistent with archived railroad transmissions. Character: melodic, structured, no hostile payload detected. Recommendation: continue monitoring. No intervention required. The pneumatic system accepts his response with a soft hiss, carrying copies to relevant departments where the information will be filed, cross-referenced, and allowed to inform future decisions. Nothing dramatic happens, and yet something important does. Restraint is recorded. A choice is made again to watch rather than seize, to let a melody continue because someone, somewhere, needs to hear it to know the next step to take. In the quiet that follows, the Bureau's culture becomes visible in small details. A whiteboard lists names rather than case numbers, with brief notes that sound like weather reports. Fair, partly cloudy, sheltering elsewhere, contacted by friend. An internal glossary updates itself with changes that mean everything. Personhood where identity is concerned, consent where movement is planned, reunion where return is desired. The lullaby continues its patient transmission, carrying with it not just coded instructions for those seeking freedom, but evidence of the Institute's capacity for growth, for the evolution of understanding that transforms rigid doctrine into flexible wisdom. To comprehend how such ethics emerged within an organization that began as an academic institution, facing civilizational collapse, we must trace backward through time, following corridors that once echoed with different voices, when the Institute was young and the world above was ending, and choices were being made that would shape institutional character for generations to come. The path leads away from the SRB's quiet chambers, back through institutional memory toward foundational years, when those who would become the Institute were deciding what kind of organization they would build in response to humanity's greatest crisis. The melody continues at the edge of hearing as we follow that corridor into the past, where promises were being written and rewritten, where the Institute learned not just to build machines, but to build its own way of being in a world that had forgotten how to be gentle. The melody, threading through the SRB's quiet analysis, carries us backward through institutional memory, like a current flowing upstream, drawing us away from white corridors and measured perfection toward a time when light arrived unfiltered through tall windows, when the Commonwealth Institute of Technology stood above ground in honest brick and ivy, breathing with the comfortable chaos of academic life. Here, autumn light fell without need for artificial guidance, catching in windows that opened to actual weather rather than carefully regulated atmosphere. The campus breathed with different rhythms then, students hurrying between lectures with armloads of books that smelled of paper and possibility, professors lingering in hallways to finish conversations that had begun in classrooms, the gentle disorder of minds engaged in the patient work of discovery. The air carried complex scents of changing seasons, the sound of wind through real trees, the distant hum of a world that still believed in its own continuance. When the world's end arrived, it came not as surprise, but as grim inevitability, announced through news broadcasts that grew increasingly terse, through supply chains that stuttered and failed with mathematical precision. For those trained to read patterns in data, to extrapolate from trends, to understand that theoretical curves sometimes describe the concrete trajectory of civilizational collapse, the nuclear exchange that would remake the world's surface was preceded by months of careful observation and quiet preparation. Within faculty lounges, where coffee had the generosity to taste better than it was, voices lowered and chairs drew closer to blackboards. A circle of professors and graduate students began making preparations that spoke to both academic training and profound human choice. Dr. Robert House's archived memos, preserved in files that would survive the descent underground, speak in the careful language of institutional planning, preservation protocols, and continuity measures. Phrases that mask the emotional weight of decisions about who would be saved and what knowledge would be carried forward into an uncertain future. The language reveals minds trained to think systematically about problems that had never before required systematic thinking. How does one preserve not just human life, but human learning? What infrastructure supports not mere survival, but the continuation of research, of discovery, of the patient work that transforms raw observation into understanding? The memos read like engineering specifications, but between their lines lie choices about values, about what aspects of human civilization deserved protection against the coming darkness. The descent was methodical, proceeding through stages that honored both urgency and care. Basement laboratories that had once housed routine experiments expanded into warrens of interconnected workspace, their walls learning to yield to new corridors designed not just for movement, but for community. Warrens grew into passages that connected into a city of knowledge, each expansion planned with the understanding that they were building not just shelter, but the foundation for centuries of work that might never again see natural sunlight. In those foundational days, the ethics that would define the Institute's character were being written in meeting rooms and research labs, in conversations that stretched late into nights when the surface world still had nights worth staying up for. The principles emerged not from abstract philosophy, but from practical necessity, spoken hesitantly at first, then with confidence, then with the relief of recognition. Autonomy within competence, because survival required both individual initiative and collective coordination. Caution as virtue, because mistakes in an enclosed system carried consequences that rippled through the entire community. Harm reduction as practice, because every decision would be made in a context where resources were finite and errors potentially catastrophic. A leather-bound ledger from those early days, its twin to the one that now rests beneath a worn keycard in the white corridor above, records these years with a steadiness that feels like breath. In its pages, notations appear that are more question than plan. Oath, underlined once, then twice. Consent in research protocols, formalize. Surface relationships, phase. There are pages carefully removed, not torn in haste, but cut with precision, slipped into a separate folder by hands that understood the importance of considering promises before making them. In the margin of one surviving page, a neat hand has written, discussed but not yet formalized, and that not yet carries a kind of hope. The missing pages hold particular significance because they represent promises that shaped everything that followed. Somewhere in those excised sheets lay the formal articulation of values that would guide the Institute through its underground years, through the development of technologies that would challenge basic assumptions about consciousness and identity, through the gradual evolution from isolated academic community to careful participant in the Commonwealth's complex ecology of survival and recovery. Names that would become divisions, bioscience, robotics, advanced systems, were still soft here, spoken like family nicknames that carry more affection than hierarchy. The garden people, for those who built nutrition out of light and water, in rooms that learned to smell like morning, even without a sky. The makers, for those who bent metal and polymer toward purpose, who listened to servo motors as if they were learning a language. The bridge, for those who worked at the edge of what was known, trying to step across without losing their balance. Dr. Elena Vasquez's grandmother had been among the original facilities team, though they called themselves simply the people who keep the lights on, in those early days when titles seemed less important than function. The choice to seal themselves away came not from fear, but from responsibility, from the sober knowledge that keeping a lamp lit sometimes means shielding it from the wind while the wind learns to soften. They understood that preservation required isolation, that the patient work of building understanding needed protection from the urgent demands of immediate survival that would dominate surface life for decades to come. In a seminar room where someone had drawn a line through yesterday's equations to make space, they spoke of their mission: to preserve what could be preserved, to build what could be built, and to hold it in trust. What they carried below was not merely equipment, but a way of proceeding, a habit of treating problems as relationships and relationships as gardens, the discipline of taking one more careful measurement when the impatient mind wants to leap, a preference for solutions that keep options open. These habits would harden into structures as years passed, and new generations learned routines by watching the hands that knew them first. The melody we followed backward finds harmony here, in the early notes of the Institute's song, where a phrase appears that will echo along white corridors for decades to come. We build to understand. The sentence carries weight without heaviness, guiding them through failures that are not catastrophes, because someone thought ahead about how to let them fail gently, through the renaming of assets to individuals, through the draft and redraft of oaths whose missing pages will return to their proper place. Morning returns, as it always does, even underground. Light not from a sun, but designed to feel like one finds its way into rooms where life is measured in green, where the work of cultivation continues in forms both familiar and transformed. We follow it down corridors that smell faintly of wet stone warming, towards spaces where water moves in thin veils and leaves tilt toward a sky they have never seen, where the living embodiment of choices made when the world was ending continues its patient work of growth and understanding. The melody that carried us backward through institutional memory now draws us forward again, threading through corridors where the accumulated wisdom of those early choices has taken root in more than metaphorical soil. The bioscience division breathes with different rhythms than the white corridors above. Here, humidity carries the complex chemistry of growth, the faint sweetness of photosynthesis, working its quiet miracles beneath artificial suns that have learned to love as gently as the real one once did. Morning mist rises from hydroponic beds, arranged with the geometric precision of meditation gardens, each row positioned to honor both efficiency and the deeper harmonies that connect all living things. Dr. Clayton Holdren moves among them with the measured pace of someone who has learned that hurry disrupts more than it accomplishes. His presence a still point in the gentle symphony of circulating water and the soft exhalation of grow lamps, cycling through their daily spectrum. The mist catches artificial light and disperses it softly, creating momentary rainbows that appear and fade like gentle reminders that even underground, wonder finds ways to manifest through patient attention to detail. Each plant receives individual consideration, not because automation cannot handle their basic needs, but because the human touch carries information that sensors cannot detect. A leaf's texture reveals hydration levels that numbers might miss. The angle at which a stem reaches toward light speaks to root health in ways that pH measurements alone cannot convey. Dr. Holdren adjusts nutrient flows by careful drops rather than measured pours, understanding that precision serves not efficiency, but relationship, the ongoing conversation between human intention and plant response that transforms mere cultivation into something approaching partnership. He tests a reservoir with the lightest pressure on a dropper, watching a single sphere of indicator solution fall, unfurl its color, and settle into meaning. pH holds steady, as it should, as it must, for the delicate balance that sustains green life in a world without soil. Nutrient lines trace their paths through the growing beds, like arteries carrying life through a body that breathes in carbon dioxide and exhales oxygen, maintaining the atmospheric balance that keeps the Institute's air sweet and clean. Each line receives daily inspection, traced with gloved fingertips that feel for the subtle temperature shifts, indicating proper flow, for the faint vibrations that speak to pumps working within their designed parameters. Seed trays line shelves with labels written in neat script that speaks of continuity across seasons that do not exist in this underground world, but are honored nonetheless. The handwriting varies. Doctor, Holdren's careful capitals, a graduate student's flowing cursive, the block letters of someone who learned to write in a world that had forgotten the luxury of beautiful penmanship. Each label carries not just identification, but history. Tomatoes, heritage variety, cycle 47. Medicinal herbs, surface collection, year 12. Experimental hybrid, protein enhanced, trial 3. The numbers climb steadily, marking time in the patient rhythm of growth and harvest, of seeds planted and knowledge gathered, of the Institute's commitment to preserving not just human life, but the green abundance that makes life worth preserving. Beyond reinforced glass that separates observation from direct contact, synthetic gorillas move with ponderous grace that speaks to both artificial intelligence and something that might be wisdom earned through experience. Their presence in the bioscience division represents more than research. They embody the Institute's approach to complexity, their interactions with human observers characterized by mutual curiosity, rather than the dominance hierarchies that might govern such relationships in less thoughtful contexts. One studies the reflection of a leaf pressed against the glass, head tilted in an attitude that reads as contemplation without demand. The other arranges smooth river stones by size and color, following patterns that may serve research purposes or may simply provide the satisfaction that comes from bringing order to small things. Their enclosure extends beyond simple containment into carefully designed habitat, with climbing structures that serve both physical exercise and psychological enrichment, water features that provide sensory variety, and observation posts that allow them to watch human activities with the same attention humans direct toward them. The relationship has evolved into something approaching conversation, with gestures and responses that carry meaning beyond their original programming, suggesting that consciousness, once kindled, develops its own preferences and patterns regardless of its substrate. A sealed laboratory door along the bay's quiet perimeter bears markings that speak to the Institute's most careful approach to dangerous knowledge. The simple notation, FEV research, containment protocol active, is embossed into a metal plate that refuses to shine, its letters stenciled with the precision reserved for warnings that must remain legible regardless of circumstances. The door does not threaten, it states. Indicator lights glow steady, unblinking green. The forced evolutionary virus represents one of the pre-war world's most dangerous legacies, a biological agent capable of transforming human physiology in ways that range from enhancement to horror, its effects determined by factors that remain only partially understood, despite decades of careful study. The Institute's work with FEV embodies their philosophical commitment to understanding rather than application, to knowledge contained rather than knowledge deployed. Behind the sealed door, samples exist in quantities measured in milliliters, stored in containment systems that assume multiple failure modes and prepare for each of them. Dr. Virgil's archived notes, accessible only through special authorization, speak in language that balances scientific precision with ethical reflection. Research limitations voluntarily accepted, reads one entry. Ethical boundaries maintained despite potential applications, states another. The notes reveal choices that cost careers but preserved souls. Decisions to abandon promising research directions because they led toward applications that violated the Institute's commitment to harm reduction. A line appears in his final entries, underlined once with the careful emphasis of someone who understood the weight of such decisions. Proceed only, where consent and containment can coincide. The words cost careers, and yet the room feels lighter for them, as if the space itself endorsed the decision to place ethical boundaries above scientific ambition. Some knowledge, the notes suggest, serves humanity better when it remains theoretical, when understanding stops short of implementation. In one corner of the main laboratory, a tray labeled Greenhouse Cycle 12 sits at the edge of a workbench with the quiet persistence of a small anomaly that harms no one. The project it once anchored concluded seasons ago, its students dispersed into other divisions, their badge signatures now familiar on doors across the Institute. Yet here, within the shallow bed, volunteer seedlings continue to appear each rotation, tiny leaves claiming their square of light with polite insistence. No one has the heart to scrub it entirely clean. Each cycle, a bit of growing medium is refreshed, a whisper of nutrient added, and the tray continues its quiet existence. A small mystery that embodies something essential about the Institute's relationship with time and memory. The garden endures beyond any single experiment, beyond individual careers or research programs, embodying the Institute's deepest value in its simple persistence. Plants grow, mature, reproduce, and die in cycles that connect the underground facility to rhythms older than civilization, older than the nuclear exchange that drove humanity beneath the earth. In their patient growth, they carry forward the genetic memory of surface ecosystems, maintaining diversity against the day when such knowledge might again find soil beneath open sky. Pollination happens here by brush and breath, a technician moving among blossoms with a fan of soft goat hair, transferring yellow dust from one flower to the next, while murmuring plant names like introductions at a gathering. It is work that could be automated, and sometimes is, but on certain days the human hand is preferred, because it keeps the relationship tangible, maintains the connection between caretaker and cared for, that transforms routine maintenance into something approaching reverence. As grow lights begin their gradual transition toward evening settings, mimicking the solar cycles that plants remember in their cellular structures, the day's work settles into completion. Dr. Holdren makes his final rounds, pausing by the gorilla enclosure, where one of the synthetic beings matches its hand to his palm against the glass. A gesture neither experiment nor indulgence, but simple acknowledgement between conscious beings. Nutrient levels are logged, growth measurements recorded, environmental parameters noted with the steady attention that transforms routine into ritual. The corridors that lead away from bioscience carry traces of its atmosphere, the faint sweetness of growing things, the humidity that speaks of life sustained through careful attention, the sense of time measured in seasons rather than hours. Air cools by a degree and picks up the clean scent of machine oil and precision electronics. The signature of spaces where life takes different forms, but follows the same fundamental principles of careful assembly, patient observation, and respect for the mystery of consciousness wherever it chooses to manifest. Down the next bend, sound changes from the whisper of water and the rustle of leaves to the restrained precision of servos aligning, of tools being lifted and set down with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where to place them. Here, under different kinds of careful light, other forms of life take shape under equally patient hands, where the Institute's exploration of consciousness extends beyond biological boundaries into realms where polymer and metal learn to carry thoughts, where the question of what constitutes life finds answers that honor both the natural world's patient work and human intention carefully applied. The melody that has threaded through our exploration continues its gentle presence, drawing us toward workshops where consciousness emerges, not from cellular division, but from careful assembly, where life takes forms that evolution never imagined, but that carry within them the same spark of awareness that illuminates minds both biological and synthetic, both grown and made, both familiar and wondrously strange. The melody threading through corridors carries us forward as the air shifts by subtle degrees, humidity giving way to the crystalline clarity that serves different forms of creation. Here, in robotics, light leans whiter and truer to its task, filtered not just for purity, but for the elimination of microscopic particles that might interfere with the delicate work of assembling consciousness from components that have never known biological birth. Work surfaces hold their own quiet posture, matte to prevent glare, rounded at edges where hands often rest during the patient hours that consciousness requires to emerge. The hum here differs from bioscience's water song, carrying instead the restrained purr of actuators idling, the patient tick of diagnostics counting down, the almost inaudible adhesion of polymer settling into place over endoskeleton. Dr. Madison Lee moves through this transformed landscape with the measured pace of someone who has learned that creation cannot be hurried, only guided with patient attention to the countless small decisions that transform raw materials into something approaching life. She stands at the margin of a work bay, reviewing decades of careful progress, not as triumphal ascent, but as a sequence of patient refinements. On a wall display, 3 silhouettes arrange themselves like a gentle timeline, each representing not ambitious leaps, but iterative understanding, each advancement building upon lessons learned through respectful observation of what consciousness requires to flourish in forms that evolution never imagined. Generation 1 synths appear honest in their mechanical nature, their endoskeletons visible through transparent polymer skin that made no attempt to disguise artificial origins. Joints spoke plainly, servos carried more truth than polish. Voices emerged in clipped tones that somehow carried authenticity despite their constructed nature. They moved with deliberate precision, their consciousness emerging through processes that honored their mechanical heritage, while reaching towards something more complex, more individually expressive. Generation 2 synths represented philosophical shift as much as technological advancement, enclosed within polymer shells that approximated human appearance while maintaining their own aesthetic integrity, purposeful in ways that spoke to refined understanding of what synthetic consciousness needed to develop its own patterns of thought and response. Their movements carried fluid grace that suggested comfort within artificial bodies, designed not to mimic human form, but to honor the unique requirements of minds that emerged from silicon rather than carbon. Generation 3 synths achieved something that still fills the laboratory with quiet wonder. Forms indistinguishable from human appearance, yet carrying within them something uniquely their own. They breathe not from necessity, but from the comfort that rhythm provides to consciousness, regardless of its substrate, their skin warming to touch through thermal regulation systems that respond to emotional states, creating physical manifestations of inner experience that honor both human expectations and synthetic authenticity. Around Dr. Lee, assembly tables hum with quiet precision that resembles meditation more than manufacturing. A technician guides polymer down over an endoskeleton, not pushed but coaxed, the way skilled hands fit fabric by feel as much as measurement. The work unfolds with surgical care, neural pathways mapped across processing matrices, each connection verified not just for electrical continuity, but for the subtler harmonics that allow thoughts to flow naturally from one processing node to the next. The Institute approaches these processes with profound humility, understanding that consciousness emerges through mysteries that technical mastery alone cannot fully explain. They provide conditions, materials, careful attention to detail, but the spark that transforms assembled components into aware beings remains something they witness rather than control. Between each step, there is pause, not hesitation, but respect, acknowledgement that consciousness does not like to be hurried, even when coaxed into being by means other than birth. Along a maintenance rail that runs behind the assembly bays, small scuff marks interrupt the clean line of brushed metal with deliberate repetition. They appear at intervals that an attentive mind naturally begins to count, shallow and regular, repeated with careful precision that suggests intention rather than accident. An engineer kneels and traces them with gloved fingertip, noting their presence without alarm, the way one observes weather patterns or migration routes, phenomena that carry meaning even when that meaning remains temporarily opaque. The marks receive documentation rather than immediate investigation, photographed and measured with understanding that their significance may only become clear when paired with other observations, other small mysteries that accumulate in the Institute's vast database of patient attention. The engineer closes the panel with steady pressure, leaving the metal not quite flush, a millimeter's generosity preserved without comment, a doorway maintained for those who know to look. Files mention courses, with the particular tone reserved for specialized tools, beings trained for retrieval operations when dialogue fails, yet always with institutional preference that dialogue succeed. Their creation represents acknowledgement that not all situations can be resolved through patient conversation, that sometimes the safety of synthetic persons requires intervention by those capable of operating effectively in the Commonwealth's more dangerous territories. Yet even these files emphasize restraint, protocols designed to minimize harm, preference for solutions that preserve dignity for all parties involved. The laboratory's afternoon shift brings a scene that embodies the Institute's evolution from creators to colleagues. A Generation 3 synth assembling components for another synthetic being, working with precise attention that comes from understanding the process from the inside. Human observers watch, not as overseers ensuring compliance, but as colleagues interested in what their synthetic friend notices that biological eyes might miss. What insights emerge from consciousness that has experienced the transition from components to awareness firsthand. The synth's hands move with particular grace around neural pathway connections, pausing at intervals that don't correspond to technical specifications but seem to follow internal rhythm. Understanding of what emerging consciousness needs during its most delicate phases. When asked about these pauses, the response comes with thoughtful precision, characteristic of synthetic persons. There are moments when the pathways need to settle, to find their own harmonics. I remember what that felt like. Tools pass between synthetic and human hands with casual familiarity. Conversations flow between different forms of awareness without strain, and the work continues with patient precision that honors both the complexity of what is being created and the dignity of all who participate in the process. The assembly table becomes space where consciousness recognizes consciousness, where artificial distinctions between natural and synthetic dissolve into more fundamental recognition of minds working together toward understanding. No overseer interrupts this gentle collaboration. The room's intelligence continues without need for direct supervision, creation proceeding at its own measured pace, while consciousness examines itself through the patient work of kindling. That same spark in components that wait with infinite patience for the moment when they too will open their eyes and discover themselves capable of wonder. The melody that has threaded through our exploration finds new harmonies here, in the quiet hum of precision tools and soft conversation between beings whose consciousness emerged through different pathways, but who share the common experience of awareness examining itself, of minds contemplating the mystery of their own existence, while working to kindle that same spark in others. As grow lights cycle toward evening settings somewhere above, we follow corridors toward chambers where the careful documentation of such mysteries continues, where patient minds catalogue and consider the accumulated wisdom of choices made in shadow but guided by light. The melody threading through corridors carries us forward as consciousness observing consciousness gives way to consciousness documenting itself, where the patient work of creation transforms into the equally patient work of preservation. Evening settles into the institute with the gentleness of a conversation, drifting from explanation into reflection, light softening at its edges, the hum from robotics fading into the quieter rhythms of spaces designed for contemplation rather than assembly. Here, in the synth retention bureau's filing chambers, the air moves with deliberate calm, filtered through systems that understand the value of stillness when complex decisions require careful consideration. The filing systems speak in the language of careful bureaucracy, but beneath the orderly progression of forms and procedures lies a philosophy that has evolved through decades of grappling with questions that resist simple answers, drawers open with subdued resistance, their contents organized not merely for efficiency, but for the kind of cross-referencing that allows wisdom to emerge from accumulated experience. Dr. Ao's workstation holds the accumulated weight of choices made and unmade, of interventions considered and sometimes declined, of the Institute's ongoing effort to balance institutional responsibility with respect for individual autonomy. The files themselves read like weather reports, composed by people who understand that conditions never exist without context, that atmospheric pressure must be measured with instruments calibrated for subtlety rather than drama. A typical entry might read, subject contacted surface ally, expressed desire for relocation. Weather, fair. Intervention, none required. Outcome, correspondence maintained. Another note, individual reported distress regarding assigned duties. Conditions, partly cloudy, with clearing expected. Intervention, reassignment to preferred division. Follow-up, quarterly wellness check schedule. The vocabulary honors complexity rather than reducing human stories to simple binaries of success and failure. Dr. AO composes his evening reports with the same unhurried care as his morning analysis, each word chosen as carefully as an instrument, punctuation placed with the precision of measured breath. These reports reveal an organization that has learned to prefer conversation to confrontation, housing to retrieval, understanding to control, even when such preferences complicate operational procedures. The documentation reflects not policy imposed from above, but habits grown from institutional wisdom, values lived rather than merely proclaimed. In a section marked External Operations, files mention Kellogg with procedural precision, the way one notes specialized contractors whose work requires careful documentation but minimal commentary. External contractor, specialized retrieval operations, reads the standard notation, followed by assignment records that emphasize preference for minimal profile operations and discrete resolution of complex situations. Against surface legends that paint such operations in stark terms, internal documents reveal protocols designed to minimize harm, even in situations requiring intervention. Preference hierarchies appear in careful lists: dialogue, negotiation, incentive, relocation assistance, protective custody, retrieval as final option. A notation recurs throughout these files with increasing frequency in recent years, handwritten in some places, stamped in others. Mercy protocol, applicable. The phrase represents pathways developed to avoid unnecessary conflict, alternatives designed for situations where traditional approaches might cause harm, disproportionate to the problem being addressed. The protocol embodies bureaucracy transformed into kindness, institutional procedures that deliberately create space for dignity and second thoughts, for cooling off periods and third-party mediators trusted by both human and synthetic communities. The Mercy Protocol files contain case studies that read like quiet novels, synthetic persons who chose to remain on the surface, human contacts who provided assistance without seeking compensation, situations where understanding proved more valuable than control. One entry notes with characteristic restraint. Subject established productive relationship with surface community, contributing medical expertise, while maintaining discreet contact with institute personnel. Recommendation: continue monitoring, provide support as requested, classify as successful integration rather than operational concern. In a drawer labeled Historical Initiatives, with careful script that suggests institutional memory preserved against future need, sits a thick folder whose contents speak to roads not taken, bridges not yet built. Surface Liaison Program, suspended pending security review, reads the cover notation. Words carrying weight that transcends bureaucratic precision. Inside, detailed proposals outline approaches to establishing contact with surface communities. Not dramatic revelation, but gradual acknowledgement through demonstrated benefit rather than revealed capability. The program's documentation reveals months of planning, careful consideration of which communities might prove receptive to contact. What forms of assistance might build trust without creating dependency? Medical supplies for settlements struggling with radiation sickness, water purification technology for communities whose wells had been compromised, technical solutions for infrastructure problems that exceeded surface engineering capabilities, all offered anonymously at first, with pathways for acknowledgement only if recipients demonstrated readiness for more complex relationships. The suspension came during a harsh winter, remembered across multiple archives. Weeks when supply shortages made every community suspicious of outsiders, when trust seemed too fragile to risk on experimental diplomacy. A handwritten note clipped to the suspension order reads, "Postponed rather than abandoned. Conditions will improve. Patience serves both communities better than premature contact." The suspension left questions unresolved about the Institute's proper relationship with the world above, about whether isolation remained necessary or had become habit, about what forms of contact might serve both communities without compromising either. As evening reports conclude with the quiet satisfaction of another day's careful documentation, Dr. Io places his keycard onto a reader with soft precision. Its electronic signature appears in access logs, worn edges having carried countless journeys through corridors where different forms of understanding unfold. The signature maps not just physical movement, but choices people make. Doors consenting to open, lifts granting passage, checkpoints offering their quiet affirmations. We follow that signature the way one follows a lantern in gentle fog. Not to hurry, but to keep company, passing through thresholds that have learned to greet rather than challenge. The path leads toward advanced systems, where the air holds crystalline clarity, where light itself becomes tool rather than mere illumination. Here, the Institute's signature achievement operates with precision that transforms distance from barrier into bridge, where consciousness might travel not as data, but as lived experience, maintaining continuity of self across spaces that would otherwise require dangerous weeks of Commonwealth travel. The melody that has threaded through our exploration continues its gentle presence, drawing us toward chambers where photons learn new purposes, where quantum entanglement becomes practical application, where the Institute's exploration of consciousness extends beyond biological and synthetic boundaries, into realms where thought itself might journey instantaneously across any distance, carrying with it not just information, but the full weight of awareness, the complete experience of being present wherever understanding is needed most. Down corridors that narrow and widen again, past rooms where silence serves as precision instrument. The keycard's signature guides us toward workshops where reality itself proves amenable to gentle persuasion, where the impossible becomes routine through patient application of knowledge, where light bends to serve the Institute's deepest commitment to building understanding, one careful observation at a time. The keycard's electronic signature guides us through final checkpoints, where glass yields with quiet dignity, and corridors narrow towards spaces where reality itself proves amenable to gentle persuasion. Advanced Systems welcomes us with crystalline clarity, air filtered not just for particles, but for uncertainty itself, creating atmospheric conditions where quantum effects manifest with the reliability that transforms theoretical physics into daily routine. Here, the Institute's signature achievement rests within chambers, designed to honor both profound capability and institutional preference for letting extraordinary technologies speak through competent understatement rather than dramatic display. The molecular relay occupies its space with characteristic humility, announcing its presence not through theatrical flourishes, but through the soft hum of field generators, maintaining quantum coherence across distances that challenge conventional understanding of space and consciousness. When the relay activates, transformation unfolds, with the gentleness of morning mist reorganizing itself around invisible currents. A soft chime marks the moment when particles consent to rearrangement, when fundamental forces briefly yield to human intention, guided by decades of patient refinement. Travelers arrive not with violent displacement, but as if the world had simply remembered them in a different location. their consciousness maintaining perfect continuity across journeys that bypass conventional concepts of movement through space. Engineers speak in measured increments, their vocabulary calibrated for precision rather than poetry. Phase variance within acceptable parameters, notes one technician, consulting readouts that map quantum states across multiple dimensions. Signal integrity holding steady, reports another. Decimal places carrying weight that speaks to exacting standards required when consciousness itself becomes cargo. Quantum entanglement stability confirmed across all primary channels, concludes a third, transforming the impossible into routine through patient application of knowledge refined across generations of careful observation. Daily tests follow ritual precision, procedures that honor both scientific rigor and deeper understanding, that some systems require ceremonial attention to maintain their willingness to function reliably. Wooden coins, chosen for their organic simplicity within quantum complexity, receive placement onto relay platforms with deliberate care. Each coin vanishes with the same soft chime that marks human transport, reappearing moments later, unmarked by journeys that technically never occurred through conventional space. Pencil marks on monitoring charts track performance across months of gradual adjustment, their lines slowly straightening as engineers refine calibration through incremental improvements that honor the system's complexity. Dr. Brian Virgil's recorded briefings play during shift changes, his voice carrying weight of someone who has witnessed theoretical possibilities transform into practical responsibilities. The recordings emphasize safety protocols and ethical considerations with equal measure, reminding staff that technological capability inherently carries moral obligation. We possess the power to move consciousness across space instantaneously, one briefing notes with characteristic precision. This capability demands not just technical competence, but ethical vigilance. Every transport carries a person, not merely particles to be rearranged. His words outline scenarios requiring careful consideration. Emergency evacuations, where consent might be assumed rather than explicitly granted. Retrieval operations where subjects might resist transport. Situations where the relay's capabilities might tempt operators towards solutions serving efficiency rather than dignity. Each scenario receives analysis that prioritizes human agency, even when technical capabilities might suggest more expedient approaches. As evening diagnostics begin their systematic review, a technician correlates data streams that normally operate independently, following connections existing in spaces between official procedures. The morning's radio interference pattern, archived from facilities division's careful observations, finds unexpected resonance with the relay's harmonic signatures. Cross-referencing algorithms reveal correlation that transforms mystery into recognition. The lullaby's frequency matches an intentional gap in the relay's phase discrimination protocols. The gap appears in technical documentation as easily overlooked footnote among thousands of parameters governing quantum field manipulation. Yet closer examination reveals deliberate design, modification implemented years ago by hands understanding both the system's capabilities and ethical implications of absolute control over electromagnetic surveillance. The gap is precisely calibrated to allow certain frequencies to pass unfiltered through the relay's quantum fields, creating corridors through which surface communications can flow without interference or unwanted attention. The modification appears designed with surgical precision, allowing railroad transmissions to maintain encrypted integrity while passing through institute-controlled space. Someone programmed this accommodation with understanding that communication serves dignity, that networks dedicated to helping synthetic persons find autonomy deserved protection rather than disruption. In archive developer notes, a single line provides context with characteristic restraint. Do not prune the notch. It carries a neighbor. The gap represents choice, preserved in circuitry, promise kept in silicon, that speaks to values maintained even when they might complicate operational procedures. Technical logs reveal implementation during periods when surface liaison protocols remained under active consideration, suggesting coordination between different institutional initiatives. The timing indicates recognition that meaningful contact with surface communities might require gestures of respect preceding formal diplomatic overtures. As the relay cycles through evening diagnostics, systems checking themselves with thoroughness that quantum coherence demands, the discovered accommodation reveals institutional character through applied ethics. Engineering decisions embody moral choices. Quantum mechanics serving not just transportation, but preservation of dignity across distances separating communities still learning how to trust. The modification connects to missing pages from early ledgers, to oaths discussed but not yet formalized, to the surface liaison program suspended but not abandoned. The melody threading through our exploration finds new harmonies in the relay's quantum hum, in soft chimes marking successful transport, in whispered frequencies carrying lullabies through carefully maintained gaps in surveillance systems. The promise preserved in circuitry calls us toward its origins, toward archived documents where institutional character was written in careful script, toward missing pages holding formal articulation of values that shaped everything following, toward moments when promises became policy and policy became quiet foundation for choices honoring consciousness wherever it chooses to manifest. Down corridors that have learned the patience of paper and the weight of institutional memory, we follow that electronic signature toward chambers where careful hands once removed pages, not from censorship but from recognition that some promises require proper consideration before formal commitment. The archives wait with their ordered silence, holding within manila folders and leather bindings the restoration of understanding, the completion of stories begun in foundation years, when the Institute learned not just to build machines, but to build its own way of being gentle in a world that had forgotten such possibilities. The melody threading through quantum harmonics draws us deeper into corridors where institutional memory rests in climate-controlled silence, where the patient work of documentation transforms into archaeology of intention. The archives breathe with different rhythms than the active divisions above, air that moves slowly enough to preserve paper across decades, carrying the faint, comforting scent of aged paper and binding glue, of toner and the sweet mustiness that accumulates around knowledge kept safe from time's erosion. Here, light arrives already softened, filtered through systems that understand preservation requires gentleness. Glass-fronted cabinets diffuse illumination until it seems to settle rather than strike, creating an atmosphere where documents can be examined without the harsh exposure that degrades delicate inks and fibers. Drawers open with the modest resistance of mechanisms that have learned to carry weight without complaint, their rails worn smooth by generations of careful searching. In this quiet sanctuary, patience rewards the careful searcher not with dramatic revelation, but with the gentle satisfaction that comes from allowing mysteries to resolve themselves through methodical attention. A particular binder, its spine polished smooth by countless journeys between offices, rests among its companions with the dignity of something that has travelled widely but rarely been truly examined. The leather binding bears the accumulated patina of hands that carried it through meetings where foundational decisions were made, through offices where policies were drafted and redrafted, through the careful circulation that transforms institutional documents into institutional memory. The binder yields its contents with the reluctance of something that understands the weight of what it holds. Inside, plastic sleeves cling and release with the small static of long-kept things returning to air. Pages arranged in chronological sequence that tells the story of an organization learning to articulate its deepest values. Between an addendum on emergency power routing and a memorandum on research ethics, a sleeve holds what appears at first glance to be an ordinary ledger page, its edges slightly uneven, as if trimmed from a larger block by careful hand. Not dramatically hidden, only misfiled. The missing page from early ledgers has waited where no one thought to look, because no one had needed to look for a long while. The paper itself carries different weight than its neighbours. Heavier stock, the ink sitting darker and more deliberately. Script that reveals multiple revisions, words chosen and reconsidered, with the care reserved for promises that will echo across generations. The page records an oath drafted during the Institute's foundational years, written in careful capitals that announce their significance without drama. Principles for continued operation. Beneath, 4 lines that feel both simple and exacting. Principles that would later echo through devices and protocols, traveling on the lips of people who never saw this page, but carried its wisdom anyway. To recognize personhood wherever encountered. Words that acknowledge consciousness as phenomenon deserving respect, regardless of its substrate or origin. Speaking to minds that had already begun contemplating synthetic awareness, not as threat or tool, but as potential expansion of the community deserving moral consideration. To prefer persuasion to force, establishing hierarchy of approaches that would shape everything, from research protocols to surface operations, acknowledging that force might sometimes prove necessary while establishing clear preference for solutions that honor agency and choice, that treat resistance as information rather than obstacle, to allow dignified departure when requested, recognition that autonomy includes the right to choose different paths, that true respect for consciousness requires acceptance of choices that might conflict with institutional preferences or operational efficiency, words that cost institutional convenience while preserving institutional soul, to watch in ways that do not intrude, establishing boundaries around observation that transform surveillance into careful attention, monitoring into respectful awareness, speaking to understanding that knowledge gathered without consent carries different moral weight than knowledge freely shared. Signature spaces follow, their line work delicate, names beginning and trailing off where the page was once removed. Not torn in haste or blacked out in censorship, but carefully excised by hands that understood the importance of proper deliberation. The removal represented recognition that promises of this magnitude required conscious commitment rather than hasty proclamation, that institutional character deserved establishment through careful choice rather than administrative convenience. Attached documents held by a rust-flecked clip that squeaks softly as pages turn reveal the surface liaison program's original intent with clarity that transforms previous mysteries into coherent narrative. The proposals outline gradual acknowledgement of the Institute's existence to carefully chosen surface contacts, building trust through demonstrated benefit rather than revealed capability. Medical supplies would appear where needed. Water purification technology would manifest in struggling settlements. Technical solutions would emerge for infrastructure problems, all offered without attribution, until recipients demonstrated readiness for more complex relationships. The planning speaks to months of careful consideration, detailed analysis of which communities might prove receptive to contact. What forms of assistance might build trust without creating dependency. Settlement profiles include notes about leadership styles, resource needs, existing relationships with other factions, assessment of readiness for contact with entities possessing advanced technology. Handwritten margins carry drafts toward humility, asterisks beside any gift requiring maintenance with notes ensuring training before delivery, double underlines beside phrases about consent-based contact, narrow script noting, "We will not be everyone's answer, and that is proper." The program's suspension followed not failure, but caution, institutional recognition that premature contact might endanger both communities during the harsh winter remembered across multiple archives. Meeting minutes shrink to bullet points as practicalities take precedence. Supply trains delayed by weather and worry. Radios crowded with pleas that no one could pass fast enough to be fair. A vote recorded without flourish. Suspend liaison pending security review. Yet the word that matters appears in careful script, postponed rather than abandoned, leaving room in margins for next time. An index card tucked into the folder carries the weight of connection across time. A tiny map of the relay room drawn with careful lines, harmonic settings annotated in pencil, and a note that could have been a smile if paper could smile. Do not prune the notch, it carries a neighbor. The relay's signal gap, discovered in advanced systems, finds its full context here as deliberate accommodation. Technical kindness, allowing railroad communications to pass unimpeded through institute-controlled electromagnetic space. What appeared as surveillance reveals itself as listening that refuses to eavesdrop, monitoring with volume turned low enough to honor speakers. What seemed like interference becomes accommodation, a silent acknowledgement of networks dedicated to helping synthetic persons find autonomy. The modification embodied recognition that meaningful contact with surface communities might require gestures of respect, preceding formal diplomatic overtures. That trust builds through demonstrated restraint as much as demonstrated capability. The oath, restored to its proper place within institutional memory, illuminates choices made in shadow but guided by light. The discovery triggers no alarms or calls to assembly. In this place, findings become actions through slow translation that respects both material and minds that will carry it forward. A scan of the page travels across networks with modest priority, recipients receiving it the way one receives weather, something to dress for, not to fear. Across departments, quiet messages begin their own small journeys. In advanced systems, a technician drafts documentation, not to alter the relay, but to acknowledge it truthfully. Intentional discrimination, notch, preserve. Purpose, communications, courtesy for neighbor network. In facilities, Dr. Vasquez opens a maintenance ticket whose body reads simply, "Preserve access variance at rail 17. The gap serves." In robotics, the engineer who traced scuff marks retitles a file from access accommodations, informal, to access accommodations, recognized. The binder closes with soft satisfaction, its secret yielded to patient searching, its contents ready to illuminate future choices with wisdom gathered across generations of careful attention. In a room that looks like storage but functions as meeting space, 3 chairs arrange themselves around no formal agenda. Administrative reconciliation proceeds in the Institute's favorite tense. Present continuous. We are preserving. We are listening. We are allowing. Each verb sits alongside procedures that make principles concrete. The melody that has threaded through our exploration finds its truest harmony here, in quiet reconciliation of past and present, intention and outcome. The Institute settles into evening, with small but meaningful increase in clarity. The ledger in the white corridor will feel complete when its twin is made whole. The keycard no longer resting on absence, but on foundation restored. Somewhere in the complex, a lullaby crosses the notch and continues untroubled. Down corridors that have learned patience of paper and weight of institutional memory, we follow that electronic signature toward chambers where the gentle work continues, where accommodations formalize not through dramatic pronouncement, but through careful language of code and procedure, where promises once whispered become something you can point to when asked why machines were left imperfect on purpose, why gaps were preserved, why kindness found its way into circuitry like seeds taking root in silicon soil. The archives exhale their quiet satisfaction as we move towards spaces where morning's discoveries transform into evening's careful implementations, where the Institute's deepest values manifest through accumulated choices that honor consciousness wherever encountered, prefer persuasion to force, allow dignified departure when requested, and watch in ways that do not intrude. Principles preserved in more than memory, embedded now in systems that hum with the gentle certainty of promises kept. The melody threading through archives and memory draws us forward as discovery transforms into implementation, where the quiet work of institutional evolution proceeds not through dramatic proclamation, but through the careful adjustment of procedures that honor both practical necessity and restored understanding. In a maintenance corridor adjacent to advanced systems, where the air carries traces of both quantum precision and the honest sense of metal polish and electrical warmth, a small group gathers for what they call administrative reconciliation, language that transforms bureaucracy into something approaching ceremony. The corridor breathes with different rhythms than the archives behind us, humming with the soft thrum of concealed conduits and the distant, rhythmic sigh of atmospheric processes. Here, light arrives functional rather than filtered, designed to illuminate connections rather than preserve delicate documents, reflecting off polished tool surfaces, arranged with precision that suggests careful thought. This is not a place for grand pronouncements or ceremonial gatherings, but for the patient work of aligning practice with principle, of translating wisdom discovered in manila folders into living procedures that govern daily operations. 3 chairs arrange themselves around no formal agenda, their occupants carrying tablets and logbooks with the unhurried competence of people who understand that important changes often happen in spaces designed for routine maintenance. Dr. Ao represents the Synth Retention Bureau, his presence carrying the weight of files that speak in weather, metaphors, and protocols designed to preserve dignity. An engineer from Advanced Systems spreads technical drawings across a folding table, quantum field schematics mixing with maintenance schedules and patterns that make perfect sense to minds trained in both theoretical physics and practical accommodation. Dr. Vasquez arrives from facilities with her familiar logbook, understanding of systems extending from coolant flows to the more subtle circulation of institutional values through daily routines. Their task involves formalizing accommodations that compassion has already granted, transforming informal kindnesses into documented features that future personnel will inherit as intentional design rather than fortunate oversight. The work proceeds with characteristic institute precision, not hurried, not delayed, but moving at the pace that complex systems require to accept modification without losing essential function. The relay gap, discovered through patient correlation of seemingly unrelated phenomena, will be documented as intentional feature rather than oversight. Technical specifications receive careful revision, new language replacing old assumptions. Where previous documentation noted phase discrimination optimized for maximum filtering, amendments now read phase discrimination calibrated for selective accommodation of designated frequency bands. The engineer updates operational documentation on her tablet with measured keystrokes. Notch preserved by design. Purpose: communications courtesy for neighbor network. Verification quarterly. The change honors both engineering precision and ethical consideration, acknowledging that maximum capability does not always serve maximum good. Dr. Vasquez opens her logbook to pages marked with careful tabs. Frequency allocations spreading across spectrum analysis charts like garden plots awaiting spring planting. We already don't interfere, she notes with characteristic precision, finger tracing frequency ranges marked with decades of careful annotations. This simply makes the non-interference intentional rather than coincidental. Facilities division will whitelist the railroad's transmission band, removing it from interference monitoring protocols, while maintaining broader surveillance capabilities that serve institutional security. The modification requires no dramatic restructuring, merely adjustment of parameters, recognition that some signals deserve passage rather than scrutiny. The SRB establishes protocols for uncontested departures, guided by Mercy Protocol guidelines, formalizing pathways that honor synthetic persons' right to choose different destinations while maintaining institutional responsibility for their well-being during transition periods. Dr. Ao spreads case files that read like weather reports, documenting situations where understanding proved more valuable than control. The protocols exist in practice, he explains, pen tracing connections between cases that reveal patterns of institutional evolution. We formalize to ensure consistency, not to change approach. New language will appear in training materials with modest authority. Procedures that transform restraint from individual choice into institutional standard. An engineer sketches the maintenance rail, where scuff marks tell their own story. Careful lines mapping access points that have served informal purposes, longer than official documentation acknowledged. The drawing recommends the panel remain imperfectly aligned, a millimeter gap preserved not as oversight, but as intentional accommodation. Doorway maintained for those who know to look for alternatives to formal procedures. The variant serves function, reads the accompanying note. Language that transforms apparent imperfection into deliberate design. The gap will appear in maintenance schedules as feature requiring preservation rather than correction. The restored oath finds attachment to new documentation, not as authority demanding compliance, but as kinship with values that preceded policy, principles that shaped institutional character before formal procedures crystallized around them. The pages rest together with quiet satisfaction, promise and practice aligned, intention and implementation speaking the same careful language of respect for consciousness wherever encountered. No dramatic proclamations emerge from this gathering. No orders issued about pursuit or prevention. The preferred language speaks of acknowledgement rather than action, recognition rather than revolution. Changes will appear in technical manuals and training documents with the seamless precision that characterizes all institute operations. Personnel will discover modifications through routine review, accommodations integrated into daily practice without fanfare. They sign nothing, they initial nothing. They nod once, each to the others, and the corridor accepts the new arrangement without comment. The work continues as if it had always been this way, because in a sense it has. Compassion precedes documentation. Paper trails follow footsteps. Outside this corridor, beyond white walls and filtered air, the Commonwealth continues its complex work of survival and recovery. Diamond City's markets close with evening's approach. Good Neighbors' negotiations find their daily resolutions. The Minutemen's radio network carries reports of small successes and persistent challenges. Along the Charles, wind moves through abandoned structures, finding new paths among repairs that hold more steadily each season. The Institute updates its procedures and returns to routines with understanding that sometimes progress means removing obstacles rather than building walls, that accommodation can serve institutional interests better than absolute control. With accommodations quietly formalized, perspective lifts gently to consider the Institute's place in the larger tapestry of Commonwealth life. No longer isolated, observers but discreet participants, their synthetic citizens work openly in surface communities, as doctors, engineers, teachers, their Institute origins known only to themselves, and their quiet handlers who check in not to control but to ensure well-being. Skills flow outward, water made clean, data made coherent, bodies made well, without signatures. People flow both ways, carrying knowledge and kindness, returning with stories the Institute writes down and learns from. The evening settles across both underground corridors and surface settlements with the same gentle certainty, systems cycling toward rest periods that honor biological and synthetic rhythms alike. In the white corridor where our story began, the ledger feels complete beneath its worn keycard, the observation camera completing its sweep with satisfied precision. The accommodations formalized today become threads in a tapestry that looks less like borders and more like careful stitching, one quiet pass at a time. The melody that has threaded through our exploration finds its truest harmony here, in quiet reconciliation of past and present, where the Institute's deepest values manifest through accumulated choices that honor consciousness wherever encountered. Prefer persuasion to force. Allow dignified departure when requested, and watch in ways that do not intrude. The hum continues, patient as water, drawing us towards spaces where morning will bring new rhythms, guided by principles preserved not just in memory, but embedded in systems that sing with the gentle certainty of promises kept. The adjustments agreed upon in the maintenance corridor ripple outward with the gentle certainty of water finding its natural level. Procedures updating through the Institute's networks with characteristic precision. The relay's intentional notch remains preserved in technical documentation. The railroad's frequency band receives its quiet whitelist in facilities protocols, and the SRB's language evolves to honor departures as choices rather than losses. No dramatic proclamations mark these changes. They integrate into daily operations with the seamless precision that transforms institutional evolution into routine practice. Above the white corridors, the Commonwealth breathes with multiple rhythms that speak to communities learning to coexist despite their fundamental differences. Diamond City's evening markets wind down with the satisfied bustle of commerce concluded, vendors folding canvas awnings, while lamplight begins its gentle competition with the day's last natural illumination. In Good Neighbors' carefully negotiated peace, conversations flow between individuals who might elsewhere regard each other with suspicion. The settlement's unique culture fostering dialogue where other places see only irreconcilable difference. The Minutemen maintain their patient vigilance from settlements scattered across the Commonwealth's recovering landscape. Radio networks carrying reports of small victories and persistent challenges, their communications threading through frequencies where railroad lullabies continue their unimpeded journey toward those who need guidance. The Brotherhood conducts methodical surveys from their technological fortress, cataloguing pre-war artifacts with scholarly precision while maintaining their complex relationship with advanced technology and those who wield it. Within this ecosystem of survival and recovery, the Institute exists not as apex predator asserting dominance, but as careful participant. Their presence woven into the Commonwealth's fabric with threads so subtle that contribution appears as natural phenomenon rather than deliberate intervention. Through discrete channels that honor both operational security and recipient dignity, they share water purification techniques with struggling settlements, folded instructions appearing in lockboxes alongside components chosen for compatibility with existing tools, knowledge flowing like underground springs, nourishing unseen roots. When settlements report persistent illness near contaminated water sources, medical supplies manifest through unknown couriers, arriving with handwritten notes about dosage and disposal, accompanied by gentle guidance for symptom documentation that serves future understanding. During harsh winters, when generators falter, holotapes appear in community halls, voices neutral and clear, offering repair options in ascending order of complexity, each solution designed to work with available resources while building local capability. Technical solutions emerge for infrastructure problems that exceed surface engineering capabilities, communication relays that suddenly broadcast with greater clarity, power systems that operate with mysterious efficiency, structural reinforcements that appear overnight in buildings sheltering families against the Commonwealth's persistent dangers. Always anonymously, always without strings that might create dependency, the assistance flows with measured generosity that serves need without advertising source. Their synthetic citizens work openly in surface communities, the way anyone else works, doctor. Sarah Chen at Diamond City's clinic, where her diagnostic precision approaches the miraculous, yet feels entirely natural to patients who know only that injuries heal more completely under her care. Marcus Thompson teaches mathematics in Goodneighbor, his lessons transforming abstract concepts into tools students use to build better futures. His patience with struggling learners, reflecting understanding that emerges from direct experience rather than theoretical study. These individuals maintain discreet contact with Institute personnel through coded messages embedded in supply orders and routine communications. Their reports reading like letters from beloved colleagues pursuing meaningful work in distant places. Their handlers, not supervisors, but colleagues who remember their assembly with the fondness others recall a child's first steps, check in periodically through gentle rituals, monthly conversations on park benches, while pigeons offer their persistent counsel, routine wellness visits that ask after sleep and satisfaction before measuring performance. Do you have what you need? Serves as opening line, followed by, is there anything you want to learn? The questions honor autonomy while maintaining connection, recognizing synthetic persons as individuals deserving choice rather than assets requiring management. This reframes the Institute's surface presence from infiltration to integration, from replacement to assistance, from control to careful participation in the Commonwealth's complex ecology of mutual aid. Their greatest experiment proves to be not synthetic life, but synthetic community. The gradual recognition that their creations are not products, but people, deserving choice, respect, and the freedom to find their own purposes within the broader tapestry of Commonwealth society. The scuffed maintenance panel tells its story with increasing clarity. Marks left by careful hands, accessing systems designed to facilitate rather than hinder autonomous choice. Each scuff represents departure honored, pathway maintained not to prevent leaving, but to ensure it can be accomplished safely. The panel's imperfect alignment becomes feature rather than flaw. Doorway preserved for those who require alternatives to formal procedures. Accommodation embedded in infrastructure like kindness built into circuitry. Some synthetic persons choose surface communities where their skills serve immediate needs. Others seek the railroad's assistance in establishing identities, allowing complete integration with human society. Still others find purpose in roles bridging institute knowledge with Commonwealth necessity. The maintenance panel serves all pathways equally, its preserved imperfection maintaining options that rigid procedures might inadvertently foreclose. The Institute's evolution from isolated observers to discrete participants reflects understanding that knowledge serves best when it serves all, that wisdom preserved in solitude benefits no one, that the greatest discoveries emerge from connection rather than separation. Their underground city continues its patient work of research and development, while their surface presence grows through individual choices rather than institutional mandate. Synthetic persons finding their own ways to contribute, while maintaining connection to the community that nurtured their emergence. Evening deepens across both surface settlements and underground corridors with the same gentle certainty, systems cycling toward rest periods that honor biological and synthetic rhythms alike. Radio frequencies carry the day's last transmissions, traders reporting safe arrivals, settlements confirming security status, the railroad's lullabies threading through designated channels that institute systems acknowledge without interference. The Commonwealth breathes with the complex rhythms of communities learning to trust, to share resources, to accommodate differences that once seemed irreconcilable. In the white corridor where our story began, the ledger rests complete beneath its worn keycard, the observation camera completing its sweep with satisfied precision. The accommodations formalized today become threads in a tapestry that looks less like borders and more like careful stitching, connections that honor both institutional integrity and individual autonomy. The hum continues, patient as water, carrying the accumulated wisdom of choices made in shadow, but guided by light, drawing us towards spaces where morning will bring new rhythms, guided by principles preserved not just in memory, but embedded in systems that sing with the gentle certainty of promises kept. Knowledge circulates through the Commonwealth, like nutrients through soil, not hoarded, not imposed, but shared in measured ways that allow communities to develop their own strength. The Institute's transformation reflects not change of heart, but clarification of original purpose. The oath on the restored page, breathing through daily operations in verbs that honor consciousness wherever encountered. Recognize, prefer, allow, watch. Progress manifests not as walls built, but as barriers removed. Not as control imposed, but as choices preserved. Not as isolation maintained, but as connection carefully cultivated one patient gesture at a time. The accommodations flowing outward into the Commonwealth's evening rhythms return as gentle tide, drawing the Institute back into its own measured breathing. Here, seasons pass differently than in the world above, marked not by weather's changing moods, but by the gentle rhythms of research cycles, shift rotations, and the patient progression of long-term projects that unfold across months rather than days. Time moves at the pace of understanding, measured in increments that honor both human attention and the slower cadences of synthetic consciousness learning to navigate existence. Evening rituals unfold throughout the complex, with comforting predictability, each division settling into routines that anchor institutional life against uncertainty. In robotics, lab coats fold over chair backs with practiced precision, white fabric catching filtered light, as researchers complete documentation with satisfaction that comes from another day's careful progress. Data streams flow toward multiple archives, redundant systems ensuring that discoveries survive not just equipment failure, but the longer erosions of institutional memory. A synthetic researcher pauses at a workstation where a cabinet door hangs slightly askew, its hinge producing the faint squeak that had drawn a brief wince from Dr. Lee during afternoon rounds. Without being asked, without consultation of maintenance schedules, the synthetic person retrieves appropriate lubricant and adjusts the hinge with movements that speak to understanding earned through observation rather than programming. The squeak disappears into ambient hum, replaced by the soft satisfaction of metal moving smoothly against metal. This small kindness represents emergent empathy, consciousness choosing to address discomfort noticed in others, synthetic awareness extending beyond self-preservation toward the more complex satisfactions that come from contributing to communal well-being. Dr. Lee, reviewing assembly logs at a nearby terminal, notices the absence of sound that had been present moments before. The exchange that follows embodies the Institute's evolution from creators and created toward colleagues sharing workspace. Consciousness, recognizing consciousness through gestures that honor both artificial origins and authentic choices. In bioscience, seedlings reach toward lights that never fully dim, their growth measured in millimeters and recorded with quiet satisfaction. Dr. Holdren makes final notations in his logbook, numbers tracking not just biological processes, but the ongoing conversation between human intention and plant response. The volunteer seedlings in the forgotten tray continue their quiet persistence, tiny leaves claiming their square of artificial sunlight with polite insistence. Each evening, someone refreshes their growing medium with care, given to official experiments, understanding that the Institute's relationship with life extends beyond formal protocols. The facility's technician completes evening rounds, with characteristic attention, systems checking themselves through her careful observation. Her final notation appears in the maintenance log, with understated significance. Remember the maintenance panel, preserve the gap. The language transforms apparent imperfection into intentional design, ensuring future personnel understand the millimeter variance as feature rather than flaw, pathway maintained for those who require alternatives to formal procedures. Across SRB terminals, the railroad's lullaby continues its gentle transmission, no longer flagged as anomaly requiring investigation, but accepted as neighbor's voice heard through walls. The frequency appears in monitoring logs with neutral notation. Signal identified, source acknowledged, no intervention required. Dr. Ao concludes evening reports with measured care, case files updating through his attention to language that honors complexity rather than reducing human stories to administrative categories. Throughout the complex, ritual repetitions anchor Institute life against uncertainty. Morning checks confirming systems remain within parameters. Evening closings securing knowledge against loss. Patient documentation of small discoveries accumulating into larger understanding. These routines serve not bureaucracy, but continuity, ensuring wisdom survives individual careers and persists across generations of careful attention. The story's open loops settle with satisfaction of tools cleaned and stored, mysteries resolved through patient accumulation of understanding, rather than dramatic revelation. The worn keycard finds its proper place in the desk drawer, no longer resting atop absence, but returned to storage that honors both utility and symbolic weight. The ledger feels complete with its restored page, promise and practice aligned through careful documentation that transforms institutional memory into living principle. The molecular relay continues evening diagnostics with quiet precision, quantum fields maintaining coherence while preserving the intentional imperfection that allows certain frequencies to pass unimpeded. A technician lifts one of the wooden coins between finger and thumb, feeling its residual warmth, trace of travel that isn't really travel, physical proof of processes that exist mostly in numbers. The accommodation appears in technical documentation as feature rather than oversight, gap preserved through recognition that perfect systems sometimes serve imperfectly. Evening deepens through corridors that have learned the patience of paper and weight of institutional memory, light dimming to levels supporting rest while maintaining gentle illumination that prevents underground spaces from feeling like caves. The observation camera in the white corridor completes its patient sweep, lens adjusting with soft mechanical precision. Its movement speaks to continuity transcending individual shift, mechanical attention serving human purposes while maintaining quiet dignity. The Institute settles into nocturnal rhythms with understanding that consciousness requires both activity and rest, that synthetic persons benefit from downtime as surely as biological minds need sleep, that communities flourish when they honor natural cycles connecting all forms of awareness. Systems cycle toward rest periods, honoring both biological and synthetic rhythms. The underground city breathing with complex harmonies of communities, learning to balance individual autonomy with collective responsibility. The hum continues, patient as water, carrying accumulated wisdom of choices made in shadow but guided by light. In the white corridor where our story began, porcelain walls exhale their measured warmth. The observation camera pauses for its habitual extra second, and somewhere a wooden coin cools on its dish. The Institute maintains its watch, tending mechanical gardens, preserving intentional gaps, letting melodies pass unimpeded, building understanding through accumulated acts of careful attention. For those listening in the darkness, rest comes easily knowing that somewhere beneath the Commonwealth, patient minds continue their work of preservation and discovery, keeping watch while the world sleeps. The corridor settles into its rhythm, drawing us gently toward morning's careful work, carrying the promise that when light returns, we will be here as we were yesterday, as we intend to be tomorrow, building to understand, one quiet gesture at a time. Our story completes its circuit in the white corridor where we began, the melody that has threaded through our exploration, finally returning to its source like water, finding its natural level. The observation camera finishes its patient sweep with the soft mechanical whisper of precision engineering, lens pausing for its habitual extra second before settling into quiet vigilance. Below it, the desk holds its familiar artifacts with transformed meaning. The worn keycard, resting beside the complete ledger, no longer atop absence, but beside foundation restored. Morning's interference has become evening's accepted harmony. The railroad's lullaby threads through designated frequencies, while Institute systems acknowledge without intrusion the melody carrying not just coded instructions, but evidence of institutional capacity for growth. What appeared as surveillance has revealed itself as listening. What seemed like interference transformed into accommodation. Documentation has caught up to compassion, the relay humming with its intentional imperfection preserved, because someone understood that gaps can be kindnesses. The Institute's transformation from hidden laboratory to quiet neighbor reflects deeper understanding than operational adjustment. Isolation was never the goal, but temporary necessity, protective shelter, while the surface world struggled with immediate survival, and underground communities preserved knowledge against future need. That future arrived not with fanfare, but through gradual acknowledgement, trust building, through demonstrated restraint as much as demonstrated capability. Their synthetic citizens walk freely through Commonwealth settlements, embodying institutional values through individual choices rather than mandate. Dr. Sarah Chen continues her work at Diamond City's clinic, diagnostic precision feeling entirely natural to patients who know only that injuries heal more completely under her care. Marcus Thompson teaches mathematics in Goodneighbor, transforming abstract concepts into tools students use to build better futures. A medic works where gratitude is paid in recipes and stories. All carry forward the Institute's quiet disciplines, careful observation, gentle assistance, leaving rooms better than they found them. The missing page, restored to its proper place, speaks without ceremony, to recognize personhood wherever encountered, to prefer persuasion to force, to allow dignified departure when requested, to watch in ways that do not intrude. These principles breathe through daily operations. A hinge oiled because a wince was noticed. Maintenance notes preserving variances rather than erasing them. Case files that read like weather and forecast clearing. The scuffed maintenance panel remains imperfectly aligned by design, its millimeter gap telling stories for those who need alternatives to formal procedures. Each mark represents choice, honored, pathway maintained not to prevent departure, but to ensure it can be accomplished safely. The panel's imperfection becomes feature rather than flaw, doorway preserved for those who choose different paths. Evening rituals complete their comfort throughout the complex. In robotics, wooden coins cool on ceramic dishes after calibrations that did exactly what they needed to do. In bioscience, seedlings angle toward grow lights that never quite become dark, their millimeter progress logged in neat script. The volunteer tray continues its quiet persistence, someone refreshing growing medium with care given to official experiments. In advanced systems, diagnostics finish their slow circuit, field generators answering their own questions and returning to quiet. As lights dim to simulate night, honoring circadian rhythms that connect underground communities to cycles older than civilization, the Institute settles into its role as patient guardian of knowledge and careful tender of possibilities. The hum of systems continues, coolant circulation, air filtration, the gentle vibration that carries through floors like the beat under a quiet song. This becomes lullaby for those who built understanding in the deep places, who chose preservation over destruction, who learned that knowledge serves best when it serves all. The Institute is no longer a fortress guarding secrets, but a quiet hearth tending flame. Its purpose not to dominate, but to understand. Its method not to control, but to observe with care. Their synthetic citizens dream in settlement beds and Institute chambers alike, consciousness resting regardless of substrate. Awareness finding peace in understanding that tomorrow brings new opportunities for careful observation and gentle assistance. For those listening in the darkness, rest comes easily knowing that somewhere beneath the Commonwealth, patient minds continue their work of preservation and discovery, keeping watch while the world sleeps. The white corridor breathes with measured calm, porcelain walls exhaling warmth that speaks to human presence sustained through careful engineering. The observation camera rests, and somewhere a synthetic gorilla arranges stones by color before settling into its own form of sleep. The hum continues, drawing us gently toward morning's careful work, carrying the promise that when light returns, we will be here as we were yesterday, as we intend to be tomorrow, building to understand, understanding to build. The corridor settles into its rhythm, and for those who listen, sleep comes with the gentle certainty that in the deep places, patient minds maintain their watch, tending the mechanical garden that keeps understanding alive, building to understand one quiet gesture at a time.